Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, John McKechnie, filling in for Jeff Erickson. That is Nick Whalen. This episode will give a nice little breakdown of all the action on Week 17. It started what feels like an eternity ago on Christmas Day, and we still have one more game tonight to get to, but we are going to get things rolling with the Sunday slate. And let's start in Orchard Park. Let's go on and just get this, pretty gnarly performance from the Jets out of the way. This one, Bills 40, Jets 14. Nick, what did you see here?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm with you on this just being kind of a weird week, obviously with the holidays. Like this morning, I had to double check and I was like, oh yeah, okay. So the Christmas slate was part of week 17. Like it all feels like 16, 17, and then upcoming week 18 are just running together at this point. I'm glad we're starting with the game of the week. No question about it. Jets Bills, which, 40-14 was the final score. It was 40-0 midway through the fourth quarter. And luckily Tyrod Taylor came in and applied some lipstick to the pig that is the New York Jets. He was actually 11-14 with 2 touchdowns late in this game, one to Garrett Wilson and one to Tyler Conklin. It almost feels like what the Jets are doing on the field just doesn't really matter at this point. It's all about next season. It's all about Aaron Rodgers' future. You got Sauce Gardner saying there's no way in hell I'm telling T. Higgins to come to the Jets. You got Garrett Wilson like 3 weeks in a row now saying, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be here. If Rodgers is back, I might ask out. And like all this is happening pregame. And of course, just setting the Jets up for this disaster showing, every single Jets game, Jeff, I'm so used to doing this with John, every single Jets game, it feels like sometime in the first half, they get stuffed on a 4th and short. And it's just like a devastating turnover that kind of shifts the tide of the game. And this time it was Braylon Allen who was stuffed early on in a 4th and 1. That set up the Bills for a scoring drive. Bill Barnwell actually tweeted this out on Sunday. The Jets are 0-4 on 4th down runs of 1 or 2 yards this season, which feels low. I mean, I truly feel like this has happened like 8 or 9 times. I can't believe it's only 4. Garrett Wilson, despite all of his whining and complaining and carrying on, if you will, John, first Jets receiver since the mid 1960s to have 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. So like, as much as this feels like it's been just a total disaster from the top down, and you're disappointed in Breece Hall, you're certainly disappointed in Rodgers, even Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson's actually still kind of salvaged a solid season. Certainly has not been to the heights that we expected it to be, but he went 7 for 66 on 8 targets with that touchdown. Again, not what you thought you were getting if you took him with the 11th or 12th overall pick, but I would not have guessed coming into the week that he had a good chance to, finish over 1,100 yards for the year.
I'm amazed that Lavernius Coles did not accomplish that, or Wayne Corbett.
Well, I think it was because Coles was constantly bouncing back and forth between the then Redskins and the Jets. It was just like he was on loan, like in soccer. It's like he just played every other season. Both he and Santana Moss. Like you could give me any year between like 2000 and 2010, and you're like, all right, 06, what team was Santana Moss on? I don't know, but I know it's going to be the Jets or the Redskins.
Yeah, that was an odd little setup that they had. I think the soccer comparison is apt there, but yeah, I got to give Garrett Wilson, star receivers we usually think of more like divas, but in this particular instance, like looking at the last 2 years for Garrett Wilson, for him to be able to put up the numbers that he has with terrible quarterback play, essentially, whether it's Rodgers largely underperforming this year, or, having to get it done with Zach Wilson and company last year, like Wilson's kind of a hard hat guy. I do kind of respect that. And he's had some great moments. That one Thursday night game against, I forget who it was on Halloween, and he had like that just unbelievable Odell Beckham-esque catch. But I digress. To kind of show how much this game got busted open, it was 12-0 Bills at the half, and then there was a sequence. Forgive me for stealing your thunder, but the drive chart went as such. We had a Jets pick followed by a Bills touchdown. We had a Jets punt followed by a Bills touchdown, a Jets fumble followed by a Bills touchdown, another Jets punt followed by a Buffalo touchdown. So that, folks, is how you can get from 12-0 to 40-0 in pretty expedient fashion.
Well, and that fumble was initially ruled a return for a touchdown. Then they called him down by contact. I mean, this got completely out of hand really quickly. Like you said, I mean, I think we've kind of buried the fact that this was, I wouldn't say it was a competitive game because it didn't really feel like the Jets were able to do anything offensively. I mean, there were 3 drives in the first half. They went out on downs with that aforementioned Braylon Allen play. Rodgers picked, and then took a safety after trying to drop back from the 1 yard line. Just no chance. Just one of the most obvious safeties of all time. But Buffalo only scored 12 points in the first half. It just got completely out of hand late. I mean, Mitchell Trubisky came in, I believe it was his first pass, immediately throws a touchdown to some guy who had never even caught an NFL pass. It was just a wide receiver screen. It's not like it was some broken coverage, just no resistance whatsoever from the Jets defense, which kind of feels like it's completely given up at this point. Shavers, by the way, was the guy's name. He became
Tyrell Shavers.
Tyrell Shavers became the Bills' 13th different player with a touchdown catch this season, which tied an NFL record. I don't really have a whole lot else in this game. I mean, Rodgers threw another interception in the second half, was then flagged for a late hit. Tried to chase down the intercepting player. That was kind of cool. Got a little smile from Rodgers. He, of course, went into this game fully expecting to throw his 500th touchdown pass. Made it very obvious that he wanted Devontae Adams to catch said touchdown pass. Instead, Rodgers had arguably the worst game of his entire career. Threw the 2 picks, 12 of 18 for 112, 4 sacks. He's now the most sacked quarterback in NFL history. A QBR, John, of 1.2.
That's you don't want to have like the highest GPA in the Delta House from Animal House, but that's sort of a number right in line with that. So that underscores it. The Jets are toast. They showed some pulse earlier this month, but I think with the Bills coming off of that kind of shaky game against the Patriots, you knew that they were going to lock back in here, and against a divisional opponent like the Jets, I think they took some joy in smacking them down.
Well, one last thing I'll add here is I was going up against Josh Allen in a fantasy final, and of course Josh Allen had a fine game, but it could have been bigger. And I thought there was an opportunity for them to stat pad a little bit late in this game. For one, they took Josh Allen out, and we saw Mitchell Trubisky for most of the fourth quarter, but there was a first and goal at the 1 yard line after James Cook went out of bounds. Maybe it was even shorter than a yard. An obvious Josh Allen QB sneak spot, pad those MVP numbers a little bit. Lamar had a big game on Christmas. They handed it off to James Cook. Very, very big of the Buffalo Bills for fantasy purposes.
Absolutely massive. And now they can't be accused of putting their thumb on the scale to try to get Allen's numbers where they need to be for MVP. But, I still think that this thing is up in the air as far as the MVP race is concerned. Let's get on over to the Big Easy. We got the Raiders. We got the Saints. We talked about this one more than maybe anybody. I didn't check it. I didn't check in on the rest of the scene last week, but we put a bit of a spotlight on this Raiders Saints game during our betting pod a week ago. I think it was even before the Saints had taken the field for Monday night against the Packers. But Raiders win this one 25-10. Is Aiden O'Connell giving the Raiders something to think about?
Maybe. I think the fact that they continue to destroy their draft pick, and maybe we'll do so again in Week 18. I think it kind of takes the obvious quarterback pick. I wouldn't say takes it off the table, but as of right now, they would have the 8th pick in the draft, and that's not necessarily a quarterback zone. Now, you look at last year's draft, that was right around where we saw Michael Penix go. I don't know if there'll be a quarterback who's really in that range. It feels like you want to be 1 or 2 for a chance at Shedeur or Cam Ward, or maybe you're settling for one of the secondary options. I'm not really sure where the Raiders would lean, but I mean, for one, it's been somewhat impressive to me that the Raiders clearly don't care about the draft pick. A team that maybe needs a quarterback more than anybody. I think if you have to go into next season with Aiden O'Connell as your bridge quarterback, essentially, you can live with that. It's a matter of how quickly the Raiders want to try to accelerate this thing, because most of the teams that are projected to pick in the bottom 5 right now, they have needs all over the place. It's like Tennessee, New England, like these are teams that have basically every position on the roster could be upgraded. You could say the same thing about the Giants, Cleveland and Jacksonville, perhaps to a slightly lesser degree. Carolina right now is the 6th pick. The Raiders are in that category, right? It's like, I don't feel like there's going to be an obligation for the Raiders to come away from this first round with a quarterback. Now, if you have the opportunity to trade up, maybe you think about that, but I think the Raiders have so many needs that you go best player available. You've locked in a great tight end and Brock Bowers. I think you have one of the most underrated receivers in the league, Jacoby Myers, but you need a lot of pieces on that defense. And I think hopefully the Raiders look at this realistically and say, we're not a quarterback away. And, maybe we have to live with another year of Aiden O'Connell, who, we've been saying all year, at the very least is a lateral move from Gardner Minshew. And, I think at this point feels like maybe even a slight upgrade. I mean, he's been slinging the ball around, man, for these last couple of weeks and was doing so again against the Saints defense. We do have to keep in mind it is the Saints. We saw it on full display on Monday against Green Bay. This is just not a very competitive team right now. But I was impressed with what the Raiders did to kind of bleed out this game. I mean, they were taking large chunks of time off the clock. First drive of the game, they come out, they get the ball first. They put together a 17-play drive that took over 9 minutes off the clock. Now, they settled for a field goal because they are the Raiders, and this was only a 13-10 game at halftime. But, ball control wise, I thought, Vegas dominated this game to a degree that maybe the final score wouldn't demonstrate. Almost 400 yards of offense, 5.2 yards per play. They ran 19 more plays than the Saints did, possessed the ball for over 15 more minutes.
Right. So, I mean, it was a pretty thorough, victory there for the Raiders. And we even saw them put together a decent little rushing performance, something that had basically been non-existent for this team. But again, maybe it speaks a little bit more to where the Saints are at this moment. But shout out for a guy in like his 10th year in the league, and Amir Abdullah, over 100 yards. Not bad.
I was going up against him in the RotoWire Dynasty League final. It's basically 50-50 going into this Lions-Niners game tonight. And my opponent, the great Jeff Erickson, the usual co-host on this pod, had Abdullah in the lineup. 20 for 115 for Abdullah. I mean, this was probably the best running game of the year for the Raiders, who only put up 4.1 yards per carry, but you'll live with that if you're Vegas. We mentioned Brock Bowers, 7 for 77. He officially set the rookie tight end receiving mark, did that late in the second quarter. It was not really a huge game for him until late. It was actually pretty quiet early on. In terms of other highlights here, there are very few, but Foster Moreau did catch a touchdown on a well-executed toss-back play, which I feel like has not worked overall that well in the NFL this season. Like, teams have caught on to these trick plays, to these flea flicker type of actions, but this was one that was wide open for that first score of the game for New Orleans. Injury-wise, Kendre Miller went to the medical tent late in the second quarter, ended up being diagnosed with a concussion. So if you threw Kendre Miller out there feeling okay about this matchup, you basically took a zero, unfortunately. 3 carries for 3 yards, 1 catch for 16 yards. Saw a lot of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who totally forgot was on the Saints roster. Saw a little bit of Jamal Williams. Who knows if Miller is going to be available for Week 18. And the Saints, by the way, big-time underdogs. I think it was 14 on the road at Tampa.
Yeah, that's going to be, especially with the motivated Tampa team, that's going to be kind of a rough finish to the season for New Orleans. Let's jump over to kind of the big surprise game of the slate. I think everyone saw this matchup, Indianapolis versus the Giants, and it's like, this is going to be the ugliest watch. But, hey, we had 78 total points scored. The New York Football Giants scored 45 points against a team that needed to win to get into the stay alive in the postseason hunt. Obviously, we saw no Anthony Richardson. Joe Flacco had to come in, throws for 330, throws 2 touchdowns, good. Throws 2 interceptions. That's kind of more like it. Jonathan Taylor was able to get up to 125 rushing yards, although kind of contained, relatively speaking, for the yards per carry, just at 3.9. Malik Nabers, monster game. Drew Lock, monster game. Is Drew Lock going to get a Matt Flynn? Could this be a Matt Flynn situation?
I don't think so. Impressive day from Drew Lock. Impressive day from Drew Lock. I'll give him that. 17 of 23, 309, 4 touchdowns, no picks, importantly. A QB rating of 155.3. Also was not sacked on the day. I mean, this was an all-time no-show by the Colts defense specifically. I think if you're the Colts and you said going into this game, you're going to score 33 on the road against a Giants team that has scored more than 22 points one time this season. That was back in week 4 or 5 in that Seattle game when they scored 29. You would feel great. You would say we're winning that game 95 out of 100 times, maybe even more, but just a complete letdown in all phases. The Colts checked every box I think that you need to lose a game in this situation to a Giants team that, by the way, should have had zero interest in winning this game. And it feels like maybe the Colts knew that and thought that that would affect the way the Giants played. That certainly did not. They missed a field goal. They had the interception on the first drive of the game that, looked like they were moving the ball. They're marching down for at least 3 points. That drive ends. You give up a kick return touchdown to begin the second half. Brutal, because you were down 21-6. So you score a touchdown before half. Giants don't have any time to do anything. You're thinking, all right, we survived this bizarre first half. The Giants are red hot. They scored touchdowns on 3 drives in a row, but it's 21-13. We'll just get a stop here. We get the ball back. We'll be fine. You immediately give up the kickoff return touchdown. On their following drive, the Colts score a touchdown, so it's back to a 1-score game. Then they go out on downs. They get stuffed on 4th and 1 deep in Giants territory. It just, everything that could have gone wrong essentially went wrong for the Colts, but it didn't feel like one of those like crazy fluky games. Like they were just thoroughly outplayed by this Giants team. I thought it reminded me a lot of Rams-Giants last season. I think that was week 17 or week 18. Gunnar Olszewski had a punt return late in the game. Giants went for 2, didn't get it. The Rams ended up escaping. Also eerily similar to that 2021 Jags-Colts week 18 game, which I think was a win and in for Indy. That was with Carson Wentz, and the Jags just beat them down. The Giants put up 8.3 yards per play in the meaningful portion of this game. That would be the 5th highest in any game this season. That would be their first game in 5 years, or this was, I should say, their first game in 5 years with at least 40 points. I mean, it's just totally inexcusable from the top down from Indy.
Somebody had a great line on Twitter. I wish I could get the proper attribution, but like the effect was essentially the Giants have neither won a game that their fans wanted them to win nor lost a game that they didn't want them to lose in like 6 years. Like it really, other than that kind of wild first season for Dable 2 seasons ago, that's kind of been the treatment that the Giants fans have been, given.
No, I think that's fair. And, again, the Colts defense just totally no-showed this game. I mean, the Giants had 11 yards per play in the first half. 11. Like I said, 3 straight touchdown drives to close the first half. And, you think of the final 2 touchdowns of the game, because for the most part, I mean, Indy put up 33 points. Like they were basically going score for score. They were just kind of behind by 1 touchdown. It felt like the entire day. But there was a sequence where we had, 4 consecutive touchdowns, and you're just kind of waiting and waiting for the Colts to finally get that backbreaking stop and go down and win the game. And, the final 2 touchdowns for the Giants, the Malik Nabers, I think it was a 59-yarder. It was just a pass into the flat. It should have been like a 6-yard gain at most. And you had 2 defenders converge on Nabers, and both just totally whiffed on the tackle. And you had a couple more defenders who could have tackled him downfield, and Nabers just kept going, and all of a sudden he's in the end zone. And then on that final touchdown, when it was a 2-point game at this point, it's 3rd and goal at the 5. You look like you have Drew Lock dead to rights for a potential sack or a throwaway. And again, you just have multiple defenders whiffing on him, and he's able to just trot his way into the end zone. Just an unbelievable series of events for the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, fantasy-wise, when Joe Flacco steps in, it always means good things for Alec Pierce, who was great in this game, made a number of really tough catches, 6 for 122 and a touchdown for him. Michael Pittman was resurrected, 9 for 109 and a score. Jonathan Taylor still got his. Both teams ran a ton of plays in this game, so there was plenty of production to go around. 32 for 125 and 2 touchdowns. But coming away from this game, it felt like kind of a Malik Nabers reminder game, right? We had all the Malik Nabers hype early in the season, and then it kind of quieted down with the poor quarterback play, but he was the best player on the field by a mile.
Yeah, he was. I think he continues to kind of firm up his status as like a, first round type of option fantasy next year. A couple of the rookies have really kind of solidified themselves, neither of them or none of them being Marvin Harrison Jr., but the LSU boys, my goodness. I mean, Nabers and
Brian Thomas versus Nabers for next year. Like, how much of it is quarterback dependent versus, wide receiver talent dependent? Like, do you favor one guy over the other right now?
Well, one of them has Trevor Lawrence, and the other one I think it's good personally. I still I'm going to be a card carrying Trevor Lawrence believer until I'm literally forced to give that card away. So I'm a big believer in this Jags offense. Hopefully, they will be able to kind of clean house, get a new system in there, and there's some like Nabers. I think the fantasy component of this is that he's so unfettered, like unchallenged, to be the number 1 option for the Giants. And he's been able to do what he's done this year with, the worst basically surrounding circumstances. So if they get like a modicum of improvement at the quarterback spot, we still know that he's going to have an elite target share, and he can, make chicken salad out of chicken, pretty routinely there. So I'd probably lean Nabers, and especially in PPR where the targets are a little bit more important. But I mean, Brian Thomas is a guy that I'm going to have a lot of exposure to. Like I will be happy picking in the portion of drafts where I have either of them, in the queue.
No, well said. Well said. I mean, it's obviously I'm biased as a Jags guy. I would take Brian Thomas, but I mean, I think both those guys are just so high upside going forward. I mean, Nabers to me looks a little bit more athletic. Like he had one, kind of jump over a defender type of catch, where he literally like jumped over the guy to make that catch on the sideline. And I feel like we haven't seen quite as much of that from Brian Thomas, who's a little bit more, I wouldn't say a straight line guy, but more downfield as opposed to the contested catches. I think that can come certainly for Thomas, but obviously both of those guys are hits. And I think what makes that debate so tough is who's had the better quarterback play this year. Like they've both been in very similar situations. Like Brian Thomas has taken off these last 4 games with Mac Jones.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's tough. I mean, it's just a testament to both those guys that they've been able to do with it, what they have with those surrounding circumstances. And then, Brock Bowers too, we were just talking about the Raiders earlier, setting the rookie tight end record for receptions, yards, something that had been standing since Mike Ditka was playing. So great rookie class. I'm excited to draft like all of them. I'm like already itching to get to best ball draft season. I'm so mad with how this season ended. Alas, we're on to the Eagles and the Cowboys. Eagles 41, Cowboys 7. This one, I mean, we had a game in which Jalen Hurts not going to be available. Cowboys come out, they start moving the ball, throw a pick six, and it's sort of unraveled pretty quickly from there in my estimation. Devontae Smith had a great game on the other side. Kenny Pickett ends up getting injured. Tanner McKee of Stanford lore comes in, throws a couple of touchdown passes in his own right, and there we had it. We had a Saquon, another strong day, 31 carries, 167 yards. That puts him in the 2K club for this year. Very impressive from him. We knew he'd get there eventually. It makes sense that he did it against a Cowboys team that has been hemorrhaging against the run all year. But anything else that you saw in this one?
Yeah, you said it unraveled quickly, and it did, but I thought the Cowboys actually did a good job after that initial pick six by Gardner Johnson. You're thinking, oh boy, here we go. And they actually put together a nice long, 12-play, 6-minute drive to make this a 7-7 game. They forced 2 3-and-outs on the Eagles' next 2 possessions. But both Kenny Pickett and Tanner McKee, I thought actually looked pretty good in this game. Pickett had some rough moments early on. There was that play where he got hit on the wrist and it looked like he was just like holding a kettlebell and just like spiking it into the ground, which I didn't see his arm get hit in real time. And I was like, what the hell was that? But really after that moment, he had the touchdown to Devontae Smith, which was on a 3rd and 12, by the way. At the time, the game was 7-7. And, you're thinking, all right, there's no way after they had just taken a huge loss on 2nd down on a Saquon run that had gotten blown up. You're like, there's no way they're converting this, let alone scoring a touchdown. Dallas, of course, fumbles on the very next play from scrimmage. That was a Jake Ferguson fumble. Philly goes down and gets a field goal. I think where it really started to unravel, though, was the second Cooper Rush interception. And this was another CJ Gardner-Johnson pick. Brought it all the way to the Philly 35. And at the time, there was only, I think, like 35 seconds left on the clock. Philly's deep in their own territory. Saquon rips off, what was his first like true big gain of the half, and then he hit Devontae Smith for 50 yards and the touchdown, and all of a sudden it's 24-7. I kind of thought we would get a little bit more of a rock fight, when you're dealing with Kenny Pickett, who of course went out of the game, and that's what what ended up inserting Tanner McKee. And when you're down to a guy who's never thrown an NFL pass, all bets are off. And obviously Philly had the lead at that point. I think it was 27-7 when Pickett left, so you felt pretty good about McKee at least managing the game, but made 2 really nice throws. The touchdown to A.J. Brown, just a back shoulder throw that you typically don't see from this random third stringer coming into the game. Like you mentioned, Saquon Barkley went over the 2,000-yard mark. They were very clearly keeping him in the game until he went over. They pulled him with about 11 minutes left. I will say, John, as somebody who has a lot of Saquon this year, pretty impressive to carry the ball 30 times and not get to 20 fantasy points. The Eagles are still running the tush push with Kenny Pickett. They ran it on 2 consecutive plays at one point. Like I'm not going to sit here as a Saquon fantasy manager and complain, because it's been great. but the amount of touchdowns that this guy leaves on the table every single week is unbelievable.
Yeah, and one of the Pickett tush pushes like didn't go the first time, right? Yeah, he's down.
No. And they ran it again. Just give it to him.
I think it would make sense to give Saquon Barkley the ball there when it's not Jalen Hurts in front of him. But
I would too. I would too. Oh my goodness. Look, again, I'm not going to complain. Saquon was great, but as has been the case for much of the season, it was really not until the second half when he started ripping off big runs. Like the run that put him over 2,000 yards was like a 20-yarder. It was a lot of 3 to 6 yard runs early on. I think it goes without saying, but not having Jalen Hurts clearly impacts this running game almost more than the passing game. In a lot of ways, like there's just no respect for, what if Kenny Pickett keeps it? It's like, well, one, they haven't ran that the entire game. And two, if he keeps it, we're just going to throw him to the ground for a 2-yard loss. And you could see Saquon's running into hordes of defenders. And I actually thought it kind of impacted his vision in a lot of ways. Like he was just kind of putting his head down and trying to, barrel for as many yards as possible. There were a couple plays where you're kind of used to Saquon seeing a lane, making that cut out, and all of a sudden it's off to the races. And I thought he actually left some yardage on the table in the first half. But again, 167 yards on 31 carries, over 2,000 yards, doing it in 16 games. Very, very cool accomplishment. I don't think we see him in week 18. I would absolutely love for the Eagles to gun for this. I think he only needs like 107 yards to break the record. Mm-hmm. I feel like Sirianni would be all in on this. But given how Saquon himself has kind of handled this season, the Eagles are locked into the 2 seed. I just don't see it happening, unfortunately.
No, he's such a key part of that offense, and they have designs of winning the NFC and making it to New Orleans for the Super Bowl. And Saquon, as great as he's been, he does have an injury history, and you just don't want to mess with that. I don't think, right. Especially with the seeding being where it is. So just bubble wrap him until it's time to go in the postseason. Maybe they'll give him some work. But not 31 carries again. I'm highly skeptical. Then I think Sirianni would.
The problem is he's far enough away. Like if he needed 28 yards to break the rushing record, I think you could justify it, right? It's just feed him in the first quarter. We don't care how it impacts the game plan. We just get him the record and we'll get him out. But, to need 100 plus, it's like at that point, you kind of have to almost play a full game. You can't say like, all right, well, hopefully he'll break a 75 yarder in the first quarter. It's just, it's too far, right? It's totally attainable over the course of a normal 4-quarter game. If he was 250 yards away, it becomes a non-starter, right? It's like, he's not going to get that unless you have the game of your life. But it's almost the perfect number where it's like, it's very doable. It almost feels like a lock if you play him. But it's not a low enough number that you could justify, kind of playing the Cam Ward game and like, all right, well, we'll get him out there, get him the record, and then get him out. It's like there's no sense in playing him for 1 quarter and just allowing him to get 30% closer to breaking the record.
Yeah, right. So yeah, you kind of it's a tricky situation, but either way, I'm skeptical that they end up giving him much of a workload at all, if any.
Yeah, I don't think it plays.
Before we get on over to our next game, we have a message from you, Nick. You're going to tell us some stuff about DraftKings Pick 6.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick 6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick 6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick 6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code, ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-89-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
All righty, and we are back. We've got the Bucs and the Panthers. The Bucs really took out some frustrations in this one, hanging 48 on their divisional foes. Everything was working for the Bucs, basically. You know, we talked about it a bit on the betting pod this past week, how, you know, they set a line that's fairly aggressive, you know, over a touchdown in favor of the Buccaneers. It ended up even ballooning further. I think it was around 9 at the time of kickoff. But my sense was people were just going to be like, okay, well, the Panthers, they took the Bucs to overtime the first time. They've been playing a respectable brand of ball in over the second half of the season. The Bucs just lost to Cooper Rush, and the Dallas Cowboys. It seems like too many points, but the counter to that was, of course, if the Bucs play their game, this is going to get ugly. And look at that. They played their game and it got ugly.
As you know, John, I take notes on Sundays and sometimes Wednesdays, sometimes Saturdays, Mondays on all these games. And the number one thing I had written down for this game as I was watching yesterday is, quote, great call by John on this game, because you're being very modest here, but you totally nailed the handicap on this one on the betting pod that we did last week, where, you know, I think if you took a look at the lines when they first came out for week 17, you're thinking, man, this Carolina team's playing well. Buccaneers coming off of this ugly loss to Dallas. Like, man, Baker hasn't really played all that well. Do we trust this defense? Yeah, I figured Carolina at that number would end up being a pretty popular side. John McKechnie said, no way. He said, I'm not falling for this. He said, the Buccaneers are a much better team. The Buccaneers are at home. And the thing that I think you and I agreed on most is, for as much improvement as we've seen from this Carolina team, specifically Bryce Young and the offense, you know, this was not a great day for anybody involved with the Panthers offense, but in general, it's been better than we expected. What gets covered up in all that is that this is still a terrible defense, terrible defense, specifically against the run. And I mean, they gave up 551 total yards. It was easily their worst defensive performance of the season, which is saying a lot. And this is now 5 games in a row where the Panthers have given up at least 200 team rushing yards. 5 in a row. That is extremely hard to do in the modern NFL. 7.4 yards per play for Tampa Bay, which obviously called off the dogs late in the game. Buccaneers were 10 of 14 converting third downs, and really, you know, started to pour it on. It felt like, you know, kind of midway through that first half, and just, you know, didn't even have that many possessions in the second half. It was just touchdown, you know, blocked a punt for a touchdown to put him over 40, had the final touchdown to McMillan to put him at 48. I will say, for a brief moment, it felt like maybe Carolina was going to claw back into this game. You know, they had the long touchdown to Thielen before halftime to make it a 13-point game. Before that, it was 27-7. All of a sudden, it's 27-14. You're thinking, okay, maybe they get the ball out of half. They come back with a quick 3 and out, and then put together a pretty nice drive to have a chance at a field goal that would have made it a 10-point game. And as we've seen many times this year, John, Eddie Pinheiro, not even close on a 53-yarder. And that felt like kind of the gut punch of like, man, if we could have came away with points here, maybe we could sell ourselves on a second half comeback. But once Pinheiro missed that, you kind of knew where things were headed.
Right. You can't leave points on the board, especially when your defense is getting pieced up the way that it was. I mean, Mike Evans, another 2 touchdowns. Jalen McMillan, like you said, with a couple of touchdowns. He's been a nice. Yeah. Payne Durham.
Yeah.
Some guys that we definitely know. I mean, just crazy. And Bucky Irving continues to be this, you know, kind of late season breakout guy who's been awesome. I mean, I really liked him in the pre-draft process, and then the combine happens. Doesn't look like he has the goods necessarily.
Yeah.
Turns out he does. And the combine lied to all of us, because Bucky Irving, that guy can ball. You know, it's just crazy. For years and years and years, the Bucs were just not interested in running the ball. And now they've kind of backed their way into finding a guy, I think, for the future.
Oh, no question. No question. I mean, there was like a 3-year stretch, you know, specifically when Brady was there, where this team just could not run the ball. It was like comical. You know, it's almost what we talk about, you know, with the team like the Raiders this season. And they've totally got that turned around. I mean, part of it is some, you know, a talent like Bucky Irving, obviously the offensive line playing significantly better as well. But I mean, this Buccaneers team, they're going to be in a very good spot to make the playoffs. You know, they should take care of business against the Saints in week 18. You know, Falcons losing last night should put Tampa Bay basically in. You know, are they on the same level as a team, you know, like a fully functional Detroit or Philly or Minnesota? No, but I think they're right there with Green Bay or the Rams. You know, it's going to be a tough first round matchup, I think, for Tampa Bay, even though they're at home. But this offense has played as well as any offense in the NFL over the last month plus. It feels like no team right now, you know, with the injuries to Detroit, can more effortlessly put up 35 points in any given week than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I thought this was maybe Baker Mayfield's best game of the year. I thought it came at a good time. Obviously a good matchup against Carolina, but I thought he'd been a little bit shaky over the last few games, even in some of their wins. He's making some of the old Baker mistakes. This was just a completely clean game for him. 27 of 32, 359, and the 5 touchdowns. Ended up being a big game for Bucky Irving, who had almost 200 yards from scrimmage. Also went out of bounds at the 1 yard line 2 separate times, and I believe the Bucs threw the ball for touchdowns on both of those. With Mike Evans. So it should have been a much bigger fantasy day than it was for Marquise Irving, who you're satisfied certainly if you put him out there, but could have added to that. We mentioned Devin Culp, who I believe had not had an NFL catch coming into yesterday. He goes 3 for 52 on 4 targets, 2 touchdowns for Mike Evans, who, by the way, John, is going to have a shot at extending that 1,000-yard streak. Despite missing 3 games earlier in the season, he needs 85 yards in week 18 to eclipse the 1,000-yard mark for what would be, the 10th or 11th year in a row? 11?
I think it'd be 11. I think he was a rookie.
Crazy. Future Hall of Famer.
Yeah, no, he's the man. And, with them playing, I believe the Saints, we have a situation where we don't have to worry about him getting ejected because he's gotten in a fight with Marcus Lattimore. So
right, they're not playing the Commanders, thankfully. Baker, by the way, has said for like a couple weeks now, I care more about this than Mike Evans does. They are going to make a point to try to make this happen. So playing DFS in week 18, always dicey, but Mike Evans is certainly somewhere I would look. Last thing I'll say here, no Chuba Hubbard, of course, for the Panthers. No running game to speak of. We saw a little bit of Raheem Blackshear. We saw a little bit of Mike Boone, who Dave Canales told us pregame, oh yeah, we're going to see a lot of Mike Boone. Well, I mean, part of it was game script, but Mike Boone was targeted twice, caught none of those, carried twice for 11 yards. Really the only guy who came through for you fantasy-wise for Carolina was Adam Thielen, who did almost all of his work in the first half. He was over 100 yards in that first half, but finished 5 for 110 and 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, so Thielen, I don't know how he's still doing it, but he is pretty unbelievable. I mean, I'd love to see Carolina, add some more around him because we can't count on this from Thielen for forever. And then when it comes to Mike Boone, he's kind of this funny figure in fantasy football history because I remember when I was hosting the XM show and it was week 17 a few years back, and Dalvin Cook was not going to be playing. This was when he was in Minnesota, and every caller was like, Mike Boone, is he going to save my season? And I'm like, and it was, and I think Madison must have been out too. I mean, it was the path was cleared for Mike Boone to do at least something, and he did absolutely nothing, and people were sour at him. And it's funny how he resurfaces to do the same thing to fantasy managers again in the last week of fantasy season. But yeah, that'll do it for this game. Hey, win column, Jags, 20-13. Tell us what happened.
Jags up, baby. Jags up. Still holding on to what would be the 5th pick in the draft. Things are good. We don't even need the number 1 pick. Just a great spot to be for Jags Nation, sweeping the Tennessee Titans this season. Really, it's all about Brian Thomas. Every note essentially that I have for this game is just Brian Thomas is giving me life. Brian Thomas is so good. Brian Thomas is just incredible on a weekly basis. These are real things that I have written down. 5 for 71 in the first half on 7 targets. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago where Mac Jones came out in one of his pressers and said that, Brian Thomas is basically demanding the ball and demanding it in a good way. He's like, I love when somebody demands the ball. And ever since then, I mean, this has been the Brian Thomas offense. He finished 7 for 91 and a touchdown. A couple really impressive plays. The touchdown catch in and of itself, back left corner of the end zone. Had another one down the sideline. What we call late hands, John. Not really showing those hands until the ball is right there. I mean, he just continues to get better and better on a weekly basis. This was a very sloppy game. We had a tornado watch going on in Jacksonville leading up to this one. There was no tornado, unfortunately. That would have been extremely fitting for a week 17, 3-12 Jags versus 3-12 Titans. All of a sudden, a tornado's going through the field. I'd like to imagine they would have just played through it. But despite the sloppy conditions, we didn't really see a whole lot on the ground from either team. Tajay Spears was having a solid day. He ended up going out in the second half with a concussion. That meant that it was Julius Chestnut time for the Tennessee Titans. Travis Etienne went just 15 for 49. He fell down 4 times. Should have had some longer runs where he was just getting tripped up by the wet grass. Tank Bigsby carried 11 times for 33 yards. The Jags built this early lead, and kind of just sat on it for most of the second half. I mean, Mac Jones only attempted 22 passes, only completed 15 of those. So, wasn't really a huge day for anybody outside of Brian Thomas. One note that I will share here. There was a Jaguars reporter who tweeted that during the game, the Jaguars announced that the attendance was over 69,000. And the tweet reads, "The entire press box just burst out laughing because if you watch this game, there was like maybe 25,000 people there, nowhere near 69,000 plus in attendance for this one." That same reporter also noted that the Jaguars had one of the Jumbotrons just playing Red Zone throughout the game, which is awesome.
I mean, that's good game day innovation. We as a society have no attention span anymore, myself included. So I'd like to see that going on.
It's self-awareness, I think, from game ops down in Jacksonville. We don't have to spend too much time here. We can start going a little more rapid fire on these bad games. But the last thing I'll say here is Jags did a really good job getting after Mason Rudolph. He only took 3 sacks, but was pressured a ton. Josh Hines-Allen, was credited with 10 pressures alone. 10 pressures for Josh Hines-Allen. And then looking ahead to Week 18, Callahan is saying that both Rudolph and Levis are going to play in Week 18. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's like this is your final shot to be on the roster next year, but embrace the chaos and don't use either of them in DFS.
Yeah, but breaks the pool queue. We're gonna have tryouts, so that's a very serious organization they have there in Nashville. Speaking of bad games that we can run through, Dolphins-Browns.
Oh yeah,
Dolphins 20, Browns 3. Dolphins, I guess, still technically alive for a playoff spot. This game just goes to show that, maybe we should have known that it was going to be a Tyler Huntley revenge game. I don't know what else to say here. No.
It was bad. It was bad, man. I actually got bailed out on this one. We had to put our picks in for Bookies Plus, where you could find all of our handicapper picks every day and every week in the NFL season. We had to get them in on Tuesday because of the holiday. And at that time, I thought Tua was going to play. I'm looking at Miami minus 6.5. I'm like, this is way too low. I don't even think the Miami offense is that good, but I just don't trust Dorian Thompson-Robinson to do anything. So I got because this line ended up, closer to 3 by kickoff. But somehow, some way, Tyler Huntley came through and ended up covering this one, no problem. I thought this was maybe Tyler Huntley's best game of his entire career. I mean, he was awful for them early in the season when he was thrust in post Skylar Thompson, post Tua injury. 22 of 26 for 225 and a touchdown, gave you 52 rushing yards and a late score as well. I kind of thought we would see Miami just, really try to pound the run. Achane only carried 10 times in this game, wasn't very effective, just 25 yards. But they opened things up a lot more than I thought they would. Tyreek Hill ended up having a much better game than you could have ever expected in this circumstance. 9 for 105, didn't get in the end zone, but caught all 9 of his targets. Malik Washington made some plays. Jonnu Smith, of course, found the end zone again. On the other side, I think, so in the NFFC, John, I was going up against Judy and Tyreek Hill. And I'm like, this is ideal. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Snoop Huntley, could not be lining up better. Both Tyreek Hill and Jerry Jeudy had great fantasy days, all things considered. Jeudy went over 20 fantasy points, 12 catches for 94 yards on 18 targets from Dorian Thompson-Robinson. DTR threw the ball 47 times for 170 yards and a pick. I don't see it with this guy. I don't understand like the NFL's fascination with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. His completion percentage was 13.6% below expected. That's tough to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think DTR's first start was kind of like a good sign that, he doesn't need to be playing significant NFL regular season snaps, but the Browns are just like, you know what? Let's keep seeing what's in there. Maybe we'll unlock something. I mean, you're the stat research aficionado, like that has to be one of like the lowest yardage outputs relative to passing volume ever.
Oh, no question. And I think the way this game was played, like both teams ran a ton of plays. There were, I think the Dolphins had 13 drives, the Browns had 12 drives. Like neither team was converting third or fourth downs. Miami was 2 of 11 on third down. Browns actually were 7 of 17 on third, which is okay. 0 of 4 on fourth down. So we had a lot of quick drives that were kind of snuffed out quickly. So a lot of opportunities. The Browns ran 76 plays, which is pretty crazy on this Miami defense that's played so well. And obviously, came away with 3 points on 76 plays. I mentioned DTR, being way below expected in terms of completion rate. To just keep piling on how good Snoop was, I looked up, all the completion percentage above expected stats for week 17. Stu Puntley was number 1 in the NFL in completion percentage above expected, 16.6% above expected. I mean, that is elite territory. I think this really could not have gone better for Miami, given the circumstances. I mean, I kind of felt like this was a toss-up game, right? Like when Tua was ruled out, all bets are off at that point. And not only does Miami come away with a win, but the Colts lose. The Bengals are behind them no matter what. So they don't really care what's going on there. They are now a Denver Broncos loss and a win in week 18 away from potentially making the playoffs. As of right now, I have no idea if Tua is going to be out there. I would say the line, which is Miami -1 at the Jets, that certainly implies that he will not be. That line was 2.5 last night.
Yeah, so that's concerning for this Dolphins team, because whereas Huntley did play well yesterday, I think we have a larger body of work during his time with the Dolphins where it hasn't looked remotely that good. I mean, shout out to the guys kind of saving their bacon this week, between him and Drew Lock and maybe even AOC to an extent, guys just kind of putting up these surprising performances. But if it's no Tua on Sunday, that could get pretty dicey there for the Dolphins. Let's get on over to the game of the day on Sunday, and then the night game as well. But Packers-Vikings, the Vikings, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but this felt like it played out in a similar fashion to the first game, where the Vikings kind of storm out to that lead. They're up 13-3 going into the half. They scored 2 touchdowns coming out of the break, and then the Packers, after being decidedly down, they put up some touchdowns, and it wasn't like garbage time. They did their best to get back into this game, of course, but ultimately ended up falling short.
I think this was a predictable letdown for the Packers in a big spot, and that's unfortunately become the narrative around this team. I think they're going to have a really good chance to win as big home favorites against the Bears in Week 18, finish this year 12-5, but it's somehow going to be a really disappointing 12-5 when really the only 5 good teams on your schedule, you've lost all of them. You get swept by Minnesota now, you're swept by Detroit, you lose that Eagles game in Brazil in Week 1. I mean, what's the Packers' best win? Is it beating the Dolphins in the cold on Thanksgiving, a team that might not even make the playoffs? Is it that win over Seattle a couple weeks ago, a team that's eliminated from the playoffs? Is it, smashing San Francisco at home with a backup quarterback? Like it's hard to find the good wins for Green Bay. And this was kind of their last chance, I think, to build that confidence and kind of tell yourself, all right, we can hang with these teams. We can beat one of these elite teams in the NFC before the postseason. So obviously they're going to be in. They'll likely now be the 7 seed, by the way, by virtue of losing this game and Washington pulling out the overtime win on Sunday night. If both teams win in Week 18, Washington gets the 6, Green Bay gets the 7. That would mean heading out on the road to Philly. I'm not that concerned, about that matchup specifically. Obviously, you'd probably rather play the Rams or you'd rather play the Buccaneers. But at some point, the Packers are going to have to go through those teams. So I'm not in a full-on panic as far as what it means for that matchup. And obviously, they played Philly tough in Week 1. I think there are enough cracks in the foundation for the Eagles that you could talk yourself into competing there. But this was just such a letdown in all phases of the game. I thought, this game meant more to Minnesota, given what's at stake, this coming week against Detroit. Like, I don't think there was some huge motivational edge really for either side, but I thought Green Bay had more to prove. And if anything, just kind of reproved to itself that, man, in these big games, Jordan Love was not great. Matt LaFleur, as always, gets flustered. And, it's like one call that goes against Green Bay late in the first quarter, just like somehow impacts him the entire game. And he's just off kilter. I think Green Bay, when they get punched in the mouth early, and they did, right? I mean, Josh Jacobs fumbles on the first drive, all of a sudden they're down 2 or 3 scores. It's a team that has this explosive offense, but at the same time, like when they need to tap into it, it's like they have to push it to the absolute brink. It's like, all right, if we don't score on this drive, the game is over. All right, now we'll start ripping off touchdowns. It's like, how do you have so many 3 and outs? How do you have so many unproductive drives until your backs are completely against the wall to the point where you need so many things to go in your favor to even have a chance to win the game? I know I'm rambling a bit here, but the best way I could sum this up, John, is after Green Bay, put a couple touchdowns on the board. It's a 2-point game. Minnesota's getting the ball back with like 2:30 on the clock. I thought there was zero chance the Packers were getting that one stop that they needed. Zero. And of course, they get burned on the same play. They ran it to the left and they ran it to the right. That kind of play action, dump off to the running back. Green Bay was just so unprepared defensively.
They were, and the LaFleur frustration was the broadcast made it very obvious, kind of how rattled he was. So, I mean,
Yeah.
and this Vikings team is we haven't seen a zillion 14-2 teams in our day, and usually we think of them as historically dominant or close to it. This is the best. I feel like the public is still having trouble buying in fully. I think everyone's of the opinion that this is a much better team than it was 2 years ago when they made the postseason. But man, what are you thinking long term with for the rest of this season for these Vikings?
I think they're legit. I think we're past the point of Sam Darnold blowing up and turning into Jet Sam Darnold. I mean, he's got 13 games now this year with a passer rating over 100. I mean, he continues. He's outplayed Jordan Love. He's had a better season than Jordan Love, no question about that. And I don't think too many people would push back on the notion that Jordan Love is a good enough quarterback to win a Super Bowl. And it's like, if you believe that about Jordan Love, I think you have to kind of buy in on Darnold at this point. And I think they have the better defense. They've been extremely healthy this year, outside of the loss of Christian Darrisaw, which definitely matters. They have been, probably the healthiest team in that division. And I think that's a big part of the reason that they are sitting where they are right now. But no, I think they're live. This Eagles team, when they play like they did with a second and third string quarterback, I might add, this past week, they're kind of that team that feels like the toughest matchup because of what they can do on the ground, the talent they have at receiver, the defense. Certainly Detroit, I think when healthy is the kingpin in this conference, but they've had enough injuries that it's called that into question. Minnesota's in that conversation to be like, would I be shocked if Minnesota's in the Super Bowl? No, not at all. I think if you would ask me that week 7 or 8, I would say yes, but they've done nothing but just continue to build on what we saw early in the season. Like, this does not feel like 2 or 3 years ago where they won every 1-score game and you just knew they were going to, get knocked out in the playoffs. This team does not have that vibe to me at all.
No, I take them very seriously. I think the defense, I think Flores does an unbelievable job there. And I mean, you have an offense that's so well constructed by KOC, and then Darnold having this unbelievable resurgence, kind of becoming the quarterback we all thought he could be back in 2018. And you got Justin Jefferson, you got Jordan Addison, you got TJ Hawkinson. It's a pretty lethal recipe. Right. So if they're able to win on Sunday against the Lions, the Vikings are now the 1 seed at 15-2. Wow.
And I think they can win that game. I really think they can. It's in Detroit. Detroit's a 2.5-point favorite, and I think that's right. That it's going to be a big home field advantage. That place is going to be rocking, but it wouldn't shock me if Minnesota won that game. And if they're the 1 seed, I mean, they're as in the driver's seat as anybody, I think, to make the Super Bowl. And you mentioned, I mean, this is not just some ragtag bunch of guys, right? I mean, there's plenty of talent on this team, specifically on the offense. And obviously I think, Brian Flores just kind of elevates everybody on that defense. So I don't really view them as a Cinderella story where you're waiting for that bubble to pop. I think they're just a really good team. And I would be very surprised if this team has a big letdown early in the postseason. To close the book on this one, Green Bay had some major issues defensively. They were down 5 defensive starters, which I think is worth noting, including Jair Alexander, including their stud rookie, Evan Williams. I mean, the safety play, the corner play was not good in this game. We saw way too much of Keyshawn Nixon trying to chase around Justin Jefferson. Keyshawn Nixon is their kick and punt returner. He's a fine, depth corner. He can't be your Justin Jefferson stopper. Eric Stokes, who was a first round pick out of Georgia a while back. He's had injuries. He's just not really the same guy. So they really miss Evan Williams and Jair Alexander, and just no pass rush whatsoever. I mean, we could get on the secondary, which didn't have a great game, but when you're letting Sam Darnold just sit back there for 3 or 4 seconds on every drop back, it's going to be really tough to stay in front of Jefferson and Addison. So that's been the fatal flaw, I think, all year for Green Bay. There's been some moments where it feels like that pass rush wakes up, but when you look back, really all those moments have come against bad teams.
Yeah, I think, we're obviously way far enough into the season to where you can, kind of look back into the resume and take a deeper look. And if you haven't beaten quality teams, you're asking a lot to start doing that in do or die situations like in the postseason. So, this was a big opportunity for the Packers, and they let it pass them by. Yeah. Let's round out the Sunday. We got a fun game to close things out on Sunday night. We had the Commanders win this one in overtime. Adam Schefter had some great background info on just how good of a night this was for one Zach Ertz in particular. I believe he banked $750,000 worth of incentives by what he's able to do, catches, receiving yards, and touchdowns. And I think it was also his mom's birthday. Like, have a day, Zach Ertz. Yeah.
Had no idea. Had no idea it was his mom's birthday. Good for him. Yeah, obviously caught the touchdown in overtime. Just another really impressive game, I thought, from Jaden Daniels, who I think it was Mike Florio had the stat earlier today that Daniels has now thrown 5 touchdowns in the final 30 seconds of a game this season. Somewhat of a technicality on this one because there was more than 30 seconds left, but obviously it was the final play of the game, so we're counting it. But it's rare to me to talk about a rookie quarterback as being clutch, right? As being like one of those guys that you fear if he has the ball with a minute 10 on the clock and it's a tie game, you don't want the ball in Jaden Daniels' hands. Normally you would say, yes, I would love a rookie quarterback to have the ball in that situation. And time again, I mean, Jaden Daniels has continued to come through. This was probably his best rushing game of the entire season. I think that the Commanders, especially early in the year, were doing a really good job of kind of insulating him, not having him take hits. And I think he's fully back now from that rib injury. 16 carries for 127 yards and did not have a rushing touchdown, but threw 3 passing touchdowns. There was a time where it looked like this game was getting away from Washington. I mean, it was 17-7 at the half. Thought Michael Penix was playing pretty well. Kind of a mixed bag overall, I thought, for Penix. Like, you certainly see the highs, but missed a fair amount of throws, kind of open receivers running toward the sideline, a lot of overthrows. But in general, it's certainly infused life into this passing game. It's infused life into Drake London, who had 7 for 106 and a couple long plays. How about Kyle Pitts coming through? 4th and 11, game on the line. Got to go for it. Squeezes one into Kyle Pitts. Great throw, great catch by him to end up forcing overtime. I will say, John, the clock management from Raheem Morris. We saw some of this in the Minnesota Green Bay game as well. I didn't want to open up that Pandora's box, but both to close the first half and the second half, I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what he's doing. He had 3 timeouts at the end of the first half. Falcons get the ball with under 2 minutes left, end up having to settle for a field goal, basically because they ran out of time and you're having to rush things. They're letting, at one point they let 26 seconds run off between plays when they were nearing the red zone before halftime. And then at the end of the game, oh my goodness, they had 3 timeouts. They didn't burn their second timeout, they had 2 timeouts. They didn't burn the first one until the 7-second mark. There was a time when 24 seconds ran off the clock. I think there was a catch by Darnell Mooney on the first play of that drive. Long gain, 25-yard gain, sets you up close to midfield. That play happened with 40 seconds. The next play was snapped with 17 seconds. I don't understand it. And of course, what happens? You have to settle for a 56-yard field goal that looked dead on and ended up like 5 yards short.
Yes, and I don't know if you saw the viral clip of people watching the game here in Atlanta. I've been to that establishment before, and they're all just going nuts thinking that he nailed this field goal, and then just like, no, it's like that was the longest
time I've ever seen between thinking he made it and realizing he didn't make it. There was like 45 seconds of celebration until there was like one good Samaritan like going around being like, he didn't make it. It was short. He missed it. And all these people are like, wait, what? Like, I mean, it was very clearly short. And that's what happens when you roll your second string kicker out there for a 56-yarder. I just unconscionable by Raheem Morris.
Yeah, really bad. And I thought the situational defense for Atlanta was also terrible. Like they would get the Commanders like way behind the chains, in like these 3rd and distance situations, because Washington, I thought, kind of played an undisciplined game at certain junctures, but then they would just pick up the 3rd down anyway. Like they just had a way, the Falcons did, of just letting down at the wrong time, making the wrong mistakes. So yeah, it's not surprising that, 2 teams that are kind of in similar buckets, the team that's better coached right now is easily the Commanders. They have obviously the better, more experienced at this stage, the quarterback and Daniels. And I think it is a key point that you brought up, that he, looked a little bit shaky in parts of November coming off of that rib injury. He looks good to go. I mean, for them to put up 30 while Terry McLaurin was able to do nothing, Olamide Zaccheaus coming alive big time in this game. And I know our colleague Mario Puig was tweeting about Zaccheaus, and the sense is maybe this is sustainable in the sense that they're using Zaccheaus in the way that's optimal for him to be used, like coming out of the slot it just makes more sense for his particular skill set. And I mean, he was running guys over during this game after the catch. For an offense that has kind of sorely been needing that true second option at wide receiver opposite Terry McLaurin. Obviously, Zach Ertz has done well from the tight end spot. I think Zacchaeus coming on could be a nice thing that makes this offense a little bit more complete as we get into January.
Last thing that I want to say on this game, John, from a fantasy perspective, Bijan Robinson had a monster first half. You're thinking like this might be a 40 fantasy point type of day for him. Washington did an incredible job of controlling the clock out of halftime. They put together an 8-minute drive that sucked up most of the third quarter. Falcons go 3 and out. Then they put together a 7-minute drive. Falcons punt on their next possession. Then they put together a 10-play, 5.5-minute field goal drive. So a lot of it was, of course, Washington finding ways to put up 17 points on those first 3 drives, but also keeping the ball away from an Atlanta offense and Bijan Robinson, who was running all over this team in the first half. I mean, the Falcons had run 9 total plays at the 4-minute mark in the fourth quarter, and then, put together that final touchdown drive.
Yeah. And so, Bijan, I think I saw that he had, fewer than 5 touches, I think, in the second half, partially as a result of Washington just playing the, masterful ball control type of football. Let's jump on over to Saturday. But before then, we do have a message from our pals over at LIV Golf. A new season of LIV Golf Fantasy is coming in 2025. New prizes, new ways to win, and more are coming in the new season. Get ready to play and sign up now at fantasy.livegolf.com. We also have a quick message from our pals over at Blue Wire. And look at that. We're time traveling back to Saturday. Chargers, Pats, 40-7. The Chargers won this one. It got way out of hand in the second half. I mean, it was respectable-ish going into the halftime. Drake May makes that kind of wild throw to Pop Douglas in the front of the end zone, get the Patriots on the board with what it ultimately ended up being their only points on the day. I think if you're a Patriots fan, you're cool with taking another L and Drake May coming out healthy. It looked a little bit dicey there for a bit after he took that hit on the sideline, but this is just a day in which the Chargers, J.K. Dobbins gets back on track a little bit. You really want to see that if you're the Chargers going into this stage of the season. And Ladd McConkey, Ladd's a dude.
Ladd is a dude, and I promise we'll go faster through these Christmas and Saturday games. But believe it or not, I don't have a whole lot of notes here in a 40-7 beatdown. Patriots had 181 total yards, gave up 428 to the Chargers. Chargers had 29 first downs to only 11 for New England. Chargers ran almost 30 more plays. They were extremely efficient on third and fourth downs. Cannot say the same for New England. It was ugly. I think you're okay taking the loss here because the Patriots are now in the driver's seat for the number 1 pick. I think you'd like to be a little bit more competitive, but I think this was a spot, and I can't remember if we talked about this on the pod a little bit last week, but part of the reason that I really like the Chargers here, to win and cover was you have a huge advantage at quarterback, all due respect to Drake May, and you have a huge advantage at head coach. And I think that showed through pretty early in this game. I mean, Herbert was dialed in, 26 of 38, 281, 3 touchdowns. All 3 touchdown throws were money, a couple of them to McConkey and then the one to Darius Davis. Great job by Davis to extend and bring that ball in. This just felt like a game that I think the Chargers kind of knew right away. Like, all right, we're going to have the edge here. They did punt on their first drive, but after that, touchdown, field goal, touchdown, field goal, touchdown, field goal, touchdown. All of a sudden, it's 37-7.
Yep, and that's pretty much all she wrote. From that one. So now the Chargers go into this last week of the season feeling pretty good. The crown jewel of Saturday's game, or Saturday's slate, was the Bengals versus the Broncos. This was an exciting game, went deep into overtime, and like the scoring really, kind of took off in the second half. We had a sequence where we had a Cincy field goal answered by a Broncos touchdown, a Bengals touchdown, Broncos touchdown, Cincinnati fumble, Denver interception, Cincy touchdown, Denver touchdown. And obviously in that last Bengals touchdown, what did you make of the Chase Brown moment? It was like like he was doing the right thing, but he
Right.
like kind of sacrificed his ankle to do it. I mean, it was like, oh, you can't get hurt doing that. That's such like an awful like turn of events in that moment.
I think the analytics would tell you that Chase Brown did the right thing going down at the 1 yard line. Cincinnati then called a timeout and snuck it in on the next play. So
Right.
it ultimately saved them like 2 seconds worth of game clock. I don't really understand that decision. And of course, Denver had enough time. I mean, we're talking almost a minute and a half to get the ball back and drive all the way down for that last touchdown to Mims that ended up sending it to overtime. So to me, you either punch it in right away or you take advantage of that decision and you kind of drain it down and try to either score that touchdown with maybe under 30 seconds left or settle for the field goal. Now, I think Cade York being the kicker here is perhaps part of the reason that they did not do that. And of course, we saw that in overtime when he had his chance to win the game from 33 yards and doinked it off the upright. So maybe that was part of the thinking, but just kind of a bizarre process. I mean, it ended up working out, I guess, for Cincy because they won this game. But to go down at the 1 and then not use that to burn more time, to me, just kind of made no sense. Certainly frustrating from a fantasy perspective. I had the over 49.5 in this game, John, which I thought was just a total donkey play. I mean, it was 3-0 under 2 minutes left in the second quarter. And I'm thinking like, we'll be lucky to get to like 35 points in this game, let alone 50. Thank goodness we were bailed out in overtime. And there was a time where it looked like this game might be cruising toward a tie.
Exactly. I mean, it took until like the last minute or two of overtime for the deciding one. And that, both teams were kind of playing sloppy during the extra period, but T Higgins, monster day for him, 11 grabs for 131. Joe Burrow continues to put up just pretty unbelievable numbers. I mean, we'll see if the Bengals are able to sneak into the playoffs. They're obviously going to need some help from the Chiefs. Can't really count on that necessarily, but the Bengals would kind of qualify as the AFC team that you don't want to play if they are somehow able to get in.
Yeah, I think that's true. And we'll see. I mean, they are favored against Pittsburgh in week 18. That's at Pittsburgh. We got Cincinnati as a 1.5 point favorite. It was actually a 2.5 yesterday. So we have seen some movement there. And, I don't expect Pittsburgh to lay down by any means. I mean, I think the AFC North is probably off the table. I mean, Baltimore is up to like an 18-point favorite against Cleveland. They should take care of business, but there are still seeding implications here. Like if Pittsburgh loses and the Chargers win, all of a sudden LA is the 5 seed and they're going to Houston, and these teams, teams and coaches will say, oh, we don't care. We'll play who's in front of us. Would you rather play Houston or would you rather play Baltimore? All right. Like I think that matters. Like, I think both the Chargers and the Steelers will be fighting this week. And I think the Chargers, if you're looking at this from a betting perspective, I would wait because if Pittsburgh does beat Cincinnati, then there's no way that the Chargers can get to the 5, in which case maybe they rest some starters. So that's one that I would just kind of set aside for now. But if Cincinnati wins that game against Pittsburgh, then all of a sudden, the Chargers are very much live. They get the Raiders this week to jump Pittsburgh and get that 5 seed, lock in that matchup with Houston.
What did you think of the sequencing of the upcoming Saturday slate where they have the Ravens playing the Browns first and then the Bengals versus the Steelers? I don't know. Some Baltimore people had some opinions on this.
Well, what's the argument for Baltimore here?
I think it would be that they could more comfortably rest their starters if they knew they knew the result of the Pittsburgh game. Because if Pittsburgh were to win, then they would obviously have to beat the Browns in order to win the division. But I guess they don't want a guaranteed dead game in the prime slot. But I know the AFC North still has some things up for grabs, but I probably wouldn't have put this as the Saturday pairing of games.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, off the top of my head, not sounding like an idiot here, like what games you could replace. So you're saying like ideally these 2 games on Saturday would be played concurrently, either on Saturday or on Sunday. I mean, I guess maybe you could you do like Washington, Dallas, Chicago, Green Bay in the Saturday slot? Then you're kind of in the same mix where it's like if Washington wins, then Green Bay knows that they are the 7 seed. I don't know. I think there's probably a reason. I was twisting myself into a pretzel last night, like before I went on VSiN, trying to make sure I had everything in order. And it's like every time you make some assumption, you're like, oh wait, no, that doesn't make sense because if this team wins, then this team won't try. So I think they know what they're doing here for the most part. I wouldn't be opposed to just lining them all up on Sunday at the same time, to be honest, or have two windows on. I don't know that we need the 2 Saturday games.
I don't think so either. It seems unnecessary, although, you get full rest for all parties involved except for the Browns, who would be technically on a slightly shorter week, with the Bengals having played on Saturday and the Ravens and Steelers both on Christmas. They'll be well rested. Let's finish off Saturday. We've got the Rams defeating the Cardinals. I did in my research found something kind of interesting. So the Cardinals outgained the Rams by 138 yards, I want to say. And in that particular setup this year, teams that had outgained the opponent by that much this year were 55 and 6. So good job to the Cardinals. And the number one team that was outgained I'm sorry about the lack of criteria knowledge, but basically the only other time in which a team had been outgained this badly and still found a way was also the Rams. This was earlier on in the season. The names escape me of that particular game, but basically my point here is that the Rams have had a couple games in which they've been brutally outplayed in the box score in terms of offensive production, but they've found ways to win ugly. So in a weird way, it's a bit of a feather in their cap, and they haven't looked great for much of December. I mean, the Jets game was really ugly. The 49ers game on Thursday night was ugly, of course, as well. And this one wasn't a work of art from a team that we're just kind of expected to be able to, kind of not necessarily score at will, but you're expecting 20 plus when you have this Rams group being out there, and the Cardinals with we thought were kind of written off at this point, having been eliminated from playoff contention, but they made the Rams work for it.
I think it was the Niners game back in week 3 when they were dramatically outgained and still ended up winning that game 27-24. I don't really know who the Rams are right now. I really don't. I mean, a few weeks ago, we saw them put up 44 in a win over the Buffalo Bills. Since then, they have scored 12, 19, and 13 points in 3 consecutive wins. I simultaneously think they're the team you want to play and don't want to play in the postseason, because you just don't really know what you're going to get game to game. But no, I think you laid it out well. I mean, the Cardinals ran 20 more plays. They out-yarded the Rams. They out-yards per played the Rams, 5.4 to 4.8. Really was the turnovers, right? Another pretty questionable game, I thought, from Kyler Murray, who's just had a very weird up and down season. He's had a couple really bad turnovers over these last few weeks, had 2 more picks, including the one that ended up saving this game for the Rams and essentially dooming the Seattle Seahawks out of the playoffs. I don't know how much of that is on Kyler versus McBride. I mean, the throw hit him right in the helmet, and obviously was, tipped up in the air and then picked up by Ahkello Witherspoon. But I mean, what an escape by the LA Rams. I don't think you come out of this feeling great necessarily, but you're in. You survived this weird season where you've had injuries. Your offense has been up and down. The defense, was terrible to begin the year. Feels like it's gotten a little bit better. I really don't know what the upside is for this team in the postseason, but I know that you can't count out a team that's coached by Sean McVay, that has, a Super Bowl winning quarterback in Matthew Stafford, and has one of the 3 or 4 best receivers in the NFL in Puka Nacua, who once again just controlled this offense. 14 targets, went 10 for 129. Cooper Kupp, 1 catch on 3 targets. Fantasy wise for the Cardinals, Trey McBride had himself a monster day, 12 for 123 and a touchdown. Finally got into the end zone. Neither team ran the ball overly effectively. Kyron Williams got his touchdown, but just 13 for 56. James Conner really, really pulled a fast one on fantasy managers. I mean, good on him for trying to gut it out in what was ultimately a meaningless game. I hope you didn't start him, but if you did, only carried 4 times for 4 yards before leaving.
Yeah, you could kind of see the writing on the wall there. If you paid attention on Twitter, you're seeing all these reports of Connor going to be able to play, but then they would be concurrently with Cardinals practice footage of Connor not looking remotely like he should be playing in that game. So yes, respect to him for being a warrior, but tough if you did kind of buy that you were gonna get your normal type of James Conner game on Saturday. Personally, I don't really want to say anything about the Seahawks-Bears game. Do you?
Here's all I'll say about this one. Chicago had 179 total yards. This was Chicago's 5th game this season with 3.1 or fewer yards per play. They've accounted for 5 of the 8 lowest yards per play games of the season. 5 of the 8 worst have been the Chicago Bears. The second half in this game went punt, 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 fumble, punt, 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 interception. That's all I have.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well and sums up the Bears season well for them to get the spotlight, get the Thursday night game. And it's a 6-3 snooze fest. That one was a difficult watch. We'll quickly run through these Christmas games. Any takeaways from there? We'll start Chiefs Steelers.
Yeah, not a whole lot here. Yeah, obviously the Chiefs are motivated to win this game and lock up the 1 seed, which they accomplished. I thought Patrick Mahomes played one of his better games this season, certainly better than the last month or so. Chiefs still really couldn't run the ball. Pacheco carried just 6 times, compared to 9 for Kareem Hunt. Travis Kelce had himself a day, 8 for 84 and a touchdown. I think the emergence of Xavier Worthy over the second half of the season and really like the final quarter of the season is going to be something to monitor heading into the postseason. He had another pretty high volume day, 8 catches for 79 and a touchdown on 9 targets for Worthy. He's a guy that you look at earlier in the season was struggling to get to like 5 targets in a game. And, last 5 games, he's been targeted 7, 6, 11, 11, and 9 times. And that's with Hollywood Brown coming back and playing plenty of snaps in this offense. So I think they've kind of found a way to unlock Xavier Worthy, maybe not quite in the way that we thought they would coming into the season, but he's become a real weapon for them. Somewhat of a letdown here, I thought, for Pittsburgh at home, right? You're getting what still might be a hobbled Mahomes, a Chiefs team that hasn't looked that good. The Steelers were just not really all that competitive. And, you and I have talked a lot about George Pickens and what having him back means for this offense. He did have the one wild, one-handed no-look catch on the sideline. That was about it. And, I think the Steelers offense specifically, and really the defense too, a Kansas City team, like the Chiefs scoring 29 is like the equivalent of other teams scoring 39. It's like the Chiefs don't have these explosive 29-point days. I think the Steelers have a lot of questions, heading into week 18 on both sides of the ball.
They do. I think the defense, things seem to be unraveling a little bit for that defense. And like, obviously with Watt maybe not being at like 100%, that has something to do with it, but feels like Minkah Fitzpatrick is not having a good season. There's all sorts of crazy quotes coming out of that Steelers locker room. And, I was, even when the Steelers were kind of riding high, I was a little bit skeptical of a Russell Wilson-led team. And per Jerry Dulac, who covers the Steelers, this is the 4th time in 6 years that the Steelers have lost 3 consecutive games in December, and the 5th time in the last 7 years that they've had a 3-game losing streak after Thanksgiving. So it's been kind of the norm for the Steelers to have a late season collapse. It seems to be happening. And I think on the other side, the Chiefs, who I was kind of ready to write off, beyond like the Mahomes voodoo magic type of stuff. It does feel like they are starting to play really well. I believe this was their 2nd best yards per play game of the season after week 1 against Baltimore. So they do, after kind of hibernating for the entirety of the season, that they are they're starting to peak at the right time. Great. Looking forward to that. And then rounding it out, we got the Ravens and the Texans, 31-2. Tough one for Houston. Houston was outgained on the ground 251-58. That's the 6th largest rushing yardage differential in a game this season. Also the 4th time this season that the Texans have been held under 4 yards per play.
Things went from bad to worse for Houston, which is obviously they're in the postseason. I think they are going to be the team, like we talked about earlier, whether it's Pittsburgh, whether it's the Chargers, that's who you want to play in round 1. That is a gift if you're going on the road, because this Houston team, it just feels dead. Just feels totally dead to me. I don't think it's egregious to lose this game to Baltimore, which might be the 2nd or 3rd best team in the NFL, maybe even the 1st best if you look at DVOA. But losing this game the way they did, just being completely non-competitive, you're gifted that safety in the second quarter that felt like maybe their key back into this game. I thought kind of a bad play by Derrick Henry. I don't know if he forgot where he was on the field, but like to basically backtrack, you just got to get like 2 yards, right? Like just get away from the goal line. And he tries to like bust it outside. And, it's rare to see Derrick Henry in that situation in the first place. But nevertheless, that was their chance. And, after the safety, it's 10-2. Houston drives all the way down, and a huge, huge fourth down stop in the red zone by the Ravens that, I think completely changed this game. After that, they marched down, make it 17-2, and you really felt like, the boat race was on at that point. Another pretty brutal fantasy day for Joe Mixon, who I think carried a lot of managers to the postseason. And these last few weeks have not been great. Really, the last month has not been great for him. Kind of feels like he's just been being dragged into the general malaise that is the Houston offense. And of course, part of it was game script. When you're trailing the whole game, just 9 carries for 26 yards, didn't do anything really as a pass catcher either, just 2 for 13. But I just come away from this game, being even more impressed by the Baltimore Ravens. I think they're going to have maybe the greatest chance possible to lock up the division, this coming week. And, we'll see how they play this out, right? It's like I'd be a little iffy on using Ravens in DFS as well, because I think if they can get this to like a 3-score lead in the third quarter, maybe we do see them, try to build in some rest on the fly. But they're 18-point home favorites right now over Cleveland.
Yeah, I do wonder if like Josh Johnson could win that game if he started it. But this Ravens defense, I think it has been like the detail over the last month of the season where people were after that Bengals game on Thursday night where Baltimore ended up winning. But it's like, how much longer, how seriously can you take a team that just is constantly giving up like huge chunk yardage and tons of points? The Ravens defense has really battened down the hatches over the last month or so. I mean, the Texans aren't nearly as explosive as we expected, but at the same time, for them to be shut out on offense, I think is, an impressive showing by this Ravens defense. It seems to be figuring things out a little bit.
Yeah. Even against Houston, impressive. It looks like a different unit than it did earlier in the season. Like you said, it was almost Bengals-like at times in that secondary. And I still don't know that it's a unit that I feel great about, but they're playing a lot better than they were in the first half. 7.1 to 3.9 yards per play for Baltimore in this game. And last thing I'll say is, we actually did see a decent amount of Keaton Mitchell in garbage time. We've not talked a lot of Keaton Mitchell. I thought maybe 2 weeks ago might be a spot for him where he would, kind of pick up some of the Justice Hill work. And that was not really the case. But again, a lot of this came in the meaningless portion of the game. But nonetheless, good to see Keaton Mitchell back on the field, making a difference. 11 carries for him, had 1 catch that went for 28 yards as well. Maybe you have a better window into kind of where he is health-wise, but kind of forget like how dangerous he looked toward the end of last season. And, he's been marginalized with the injury and with the addition of Derrick Henry. They don't really need him. But somebody who I could see being a minor difference maker for this team in the playoffs.
Yeah, he just adds a certain open field speed element that the Ravens are largely lacking in the backfield otherwise. So basically, if you are doing one of those like best ball playoff tournaments or you do a playoff draft, there are definitely like worse late round considerations than a guy with the potential upside of Keaton Mitchell, who it hasn't looked explosive completely yet, except for that 28-yard grab, but as time wears on and he gets a little bit more involved here, I think he's something that the Ravens want to implement going into January. But I guess that's going to do it. We covered all that ground. Look at that. And we still have the Lions-Niners game on Monday night to look forward to. But Nick, great breaking down this Week 17 slate for you. Hope everyone enjoyed this edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, again, presented by our friends over at DraftKings Pick 6 and over at LIV Fantasy. For Nick Whalen, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.